I'm doing well.
Good.
Hey everyone. We're going to talk a little bit about meeting rooms and teams and all that good stuff. I'd love to say that my slide follows all of the fantastic tips and tricks that were just shared. I would say some of it does. Some of it I should rethink. So it's a good learning experience for everyone, for sure. That was good stuff. So a little bit about myself. I'm here locally in Minneapolis. I have been in the UC industry since 2007. Somewhere I did a count once before, deployed a little over 500,000 Teams voice seats to date. So a ton of experience in the telephony world. And my primary job is I do all of the AI and internal development at T2M Works. And when I'm not doing that, I coach debate. And that's my way to tell everyone that I can pretty much speak without taking a breath for about 2 hours straight because I coach debate and that's what we do. It feels like all the time. So if you have questions, you should absolutely throw them in the chat. Raise your hand. Come off mute. I don't care. Just scream my way. And the last piece, I am the founder and I run the Minnesota Teams User Group meeting. We meet quarterly. So there we go. Last thing, Argyle MVP is my website. You can actually find this presentation. I just posted it online, so you can have access to it if you want and download it. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about meeting rooms that are inclusive and interactive meetings, how Microsoft makes sure that they're easy for all to use, the flexibility. We're going to talk about some deployment and management stuff and actually dive into a couple of demos along the way. So right off the top, what in Microsoft's eyes, what is a inclusive and interactive meeting? What does that look like to them? And really everything, I know this will come as an absolute shock, it is powered on AI. And that's kind of, I say it tongue in cheek because everything is like, AI or Copilot at this point in time. But Microsoft really is doing some really cool things in that space, specifically within meeting rooms. So they didn't just slap the word AI on the front of something and say, hey, we made something AI ready. They're doing really cool stuff. So we're going to kind of talk about this in four really big areas. We're going to talk about noise suppression and bandwidth optimization. We're going to talk about multi-cam experiences. We're going to talk about Copilot. Yep, I know we couldn't make it through a conference or a meeting without saying the word Copilot 10 times. And then we'll talk a little bit about IntelliFrame just within this section. So, oh yeah, there's a cute video. The video, when you download something, it's huge because I put all the videos I could find that are really neat in there as well, just so as you're going through it. So the first thing to talk about is these dynamic layouts. So Microsoft, when you deploy your Teams room system, they've worked really hard to be able to modify the look and feel based on the equipment that's in your room. So what we're seeing on the screen here is a dual screen setup, right? So we've got a Logitech Riley cam in the middle, we've got some speakers underneath it, and then we've got the two screens. And what you'll see today is they are now spreading that content across all of the screens. If you remember the old days, they would throw content on one screen only and then put all the video on the other, and that was it. That was like your life experience basically in a Teams room environment. What we do now, though, is we intelligently spread that information across. And the other big item you'll notice, and it'll be a call out later, but you'll see the chat over here is on the screen as well. That's on by default now when you walk into a Teams room. And that's critical because I don't know about you, but I've been in plenty of rooms inside of an MTR before where someone would say something in the chat, but because we were all in the room and everyone else was hybrid on the outside, those in the room had no clue the chat was even happening. So you ended up with this kind of bifurcated Teams or meeting experience where you had remote participants chatting in the chat, and then those in the room chatting with each other and kind of forgetting about each other in the process. So this new look, this dynamic video layout kind of removes that kind of bifurcation that occurred inside the room when it happened. And you'll notice a lot of the drives behind a lot of these things is the acknowledgement that people are going to be at home. Meeting rooms do still exist, but you should also think about meeting rooms beyond, right? We'll talk about sizes and all that later, but if you're sitting at home today, technically that's a meeting room. and you need to think about your space as that meeting room and how Microsoft is trying to help within even those individual little spaces. So here we can kind of see a little bit more information about how Front Row is doing, and you kind of see it larger, right? We've got our remote attendees, they're appearing at the bottom of the screen. We've got our content down the center. We have our hand raise off to the side or any other type of activity information, and then that chat all on the screen at once. So it really does kind of help you bring that immersive kind of visual as you're going through it. So that's one area where AI is kind of driving that logic of the environment. The second is around companion devices. I am a huge fan of this. So when I go into meetings, it is entirely common for me to either have my phone or my laptop, and I will join that meeting, even in a space like this, not only from the main room, but also from the device in front of me. And I do that for a couple of reasons. One, it gives me a really great way to be able to do reactions. And that's what a lot of people don't realize, that when you have remote speakers, right, they're looking for that kind of reaction, the thumbs ups, the hand claps, all of those kind of things. And if you're in a room with 15 other people, you don't have a way to do that activity. So that's where that companion device kind of makes sense, that I'm listening and I can give a thumbs up or a heart or whatever the case might be to that remote speaker. But the other piece is around some of the intelligence you'll see later on about cameras and the multi-camera work. The big thing to remember about this is we're bringing our personal devices in. They're muted by default. That's the beauty of it. You're not going to come in and like create that echo loop that everyone has. But I would really encourage you to think about, you know, the device not to like watch TikTok videos or something during the meeting, but instead use it as a collaborative tool as part of the process. So companion device is another big area. Another big investment they've made is around wireless content sharing. So you can walk into a room now, you don't have to have a predefined meeting, and I can easily, from my companion device, easily go ahead and cast that information from my phone, right, PowerPoint Live, Excel, whatever the case is, directly to the screen. So that's another really big investment for usability. Real-time collaboration. So Microsoft introduced this a long time ago, and it keeps getting better and way more effective. But I don't think people use it enough, which is kind of sad in my mind. So real-time collaboration, Microsoft has their whiteboard and intelligent content capture. So the idea is I have an analog whiteboard, right? It's back there. Yeah, I don't know about you, but plenty of conference rooms I walk into all still have dry erase whiteboards on the walls, right? People aren't out replacing them with, you know, $10,000 touchscreens anytime soon. So while people are writing on those whiteboards, how do we get that content back to people? And what's really neat is that flexibility. So I am going to, if this works, let's find out here in a hot moment. What a lot of people don't realize is that you can do this not only from, you know, a room device, but you can also do it. Oh, hold on, behave now. Demo gods, be good. You can always do this from just a standard camera that you might have running on your laptop, and it's gonna not work now, but maybe it will. Let's try it. Here we go. Did you get it? Do it. There we go. So I can literally take a piece of paper that's on my desk, right? And as I run my hand, I didn't turn on the transparency in this case, but you'll see that, you know, I can do this kind of fun silliness with just a simple piece of paper, and the AI recognition is going to do that. What a lot of people don't realize is that this content camera technology isn't limited to just Teams rooms. You can do this from your Windows client at any point in time, and all you literally need to do is from that client, when you do the share, what a lot of people don't realize is down here it says share content from camera. You can pick that second camera or your primary camera if you really want, and then it will it'll go ahead and frame it back in for you, and then go ahead and let you share that out, and you can start drawing and writing and doing all that kind of fun stuff. So I'm just gonna move this camera out of the way. Okay, just want to make sure my screen share was still going since I flopped in and out. Sometimes Teams can be silly. Yeah, so Michael brings up a good point there about physical whiteboards versus the whiteboard app. Absolutely, right? Like if you can use the whiteboard app, go for it. For whatever reason, I have seen lots of individuals incredibly hesitant about it. And I think part of it is they don't all have touch screens. So it's kind of hard sometimes to draw and move things around. So, and people just physically like, dry erase. So they'll just jump right in and do it that way. So, but either way is a good way. But like I said, I love to do this. I've got a whiteboard literally on the side of my office over here, and I will just point my camera at it when I'm doing demos, and I can just draw right on that whiteboard too. So it's kind of a fun little way to do it. All right. The next thing we want to talk about a little bit is IntelliFrame, and this is where we're getting really, really fancy with Microsoft and some of the things they can do. So IntelliFrame was announced a few years ago, and it originally started as a device specific. If my camera had the options, I could pull it off. And now Microsoft is expanding this to use what's referred to as Cloud IntelliFrame, where it uses the power of the cloud to figure out where the different separations are. So maybe I have a Neat camera. Neat makes some really cool cameras where they've got it built in from an OEM perspective. So here, if I had 3 people in my room right now with the Neat camera, it would actually make it look like there was 3 different video frames coming from this individual camera, and they're doing that IntelliFrame action from the hardware itself. If I didn't, and we were in a Teams room situation where maybe I'm using an old legacy rally cam from Logitech that doesn't have that built in, Microsoft can use the power of the cloud to intelligently figure out who are the different individuals in the room and break them up. So when you see what on the screen, right, like as we're in that room, it knows there's 4 different people in that room and it breaks up the camera. Now I will say, depending on where the camera's angled, sometimes you get these kind of weird angles. Like even in this video, you get the side of Corey's head here because that's how the camera is pointed. But it is kind of neat to be able to see that differentiation of people. There's 2 big items that are coming to IntelliFrame, and I'm really excited about both of them. I've seen them both in use, and I don't think they're publicly available yet. But I can never keep track anymore. So the first one is automatic camera switching. So as I mentioned before, when I walk into a room, I oftentimes open up my laptop, I join my meeting, I even flip on my camera from that second joined space. So the idea is that Microsoft will be able to intelligently select, instead of using the big room camera when I'm speaking, go instead use the local camera that's right in front of me because it's got a better view. I'm not going to get that weird side head kind of view at that point in time. Now I'm actually right there and I'm looking at the camera. So that's a kind of a really neat ability to be able to intelligently switch between the two. The second one is a multicam experience. So in a meeting room, you could have multiple cameras, right, where potentially they have different kind of views. So here you're seeing, right, kind of a camera in the front presenter row, and then further back, a collection of people. And the system is able to intelligently select between those cameras and the angles based on who's speaking and what makes the most sense. So these are kind of 2 very neat enhancements that are coming to that IntelliFrame logic. Both of these were announced back at Enterprise Connect back in April, May, whatever that was. It's all a blur now. The next piece is a big one, is around speaker recognition and attribution. So Microsoft's done a lot of work, and this is kind of a key element kind of to the future of the meeting room beyond just right having a good transcript. So speaker recognition has historically only worked with intelligent speakers. So I would have a meeting room. I would have purchased an intelligent speaker in that room, and that intelligent speaker would then be able to detect up to 10 different people into the room, and based on my voice patterns and all those kind of fun things, be able to identify that the person speaking right now is me, Richard, versus Michael, versus Susie, versus Amber, whoever the hell might be in that room at the time. And the key piece is, if we're going to be able to have effective note taking via Copilot, then we need to be able to differentiate between people in a room. So obviously, when you're in a meeting and everyone's remote, it's really easy because there's one video feed, there's one person in the room, you don't have to differentiate between them. So Copilot does a spectacular job of giving you recaps and information like that. But if you're, so the moment you walk into a room and now you have 2, 3, 4, 5 people in the room, it gets a little more crazy at that point in time, because now Copilot will try its best, right, to be able to differentiate, but it may not always be accurate. And that's where this speaker recognition and attribution comes into play. So the big thing to know is that previously it was only available on those intelligent speakers. So Microsoft is rolling out an update that's available for the Teams room on Windows, and we'll talk about the different types of Teams rooms later on. But for Teams room on Windows, that will be able to intelligently figure out that using AI, who is the active speaker at that time, and to be able to attribute the correct information to the right people. And it will work on any type of speakers. So if you've got, maybe you have the Shure mounted ones that are above your head, or maybe you're just using, right, some sort of old Jabra hockey puck in the room, either one of those, the system will be able to figure out who is the active speaker and be able to do that. The great thing is that this isn't just limited to Teams rooms on Windows. You'll see that it's going to go to Android and also to bring your own device rooms in 2025. So this is going to continue to expand out so that you have more options. The key piece for this to work is that you need to set up a voice profile. This is disabled by default. The second piece, and we'll get into that one more second. The second piece that goes with it, though, is this idea of voice isolation. I don't know about you, but there's plenty of people that require, right? Like I'm in a place where, you know, we have a bunch of background noise. Maybe it's a shared cubicle environment. Maybe it is something that maybe I'm at a coffee shop or whatever the case is. So Microsoft has always had this idea of noise suppression, but noise suppression had two fatal flaws. First, what we would call over suppression. So if I was in a noisy room and someone came close to my microphone, it didn't know who was the actual speaker at that point in time, because now you've got two people that are really close to the microphone at the same time, and you would end up with this instance of over suppression sometimes, where it would actually mute me as the active speaker because John was really close to me and talking really loud. The second piece is it would fail on the other side, that leakage idea, where it would panic, it wouldn't know who it is, so it would just start letting in all sorts of noise from the background, and you'd have this kind of just kind of chaotic experience. So Microsoft's released this idea of voice isolation, built on the same concept here, right? I want to be able to understand who my speaker is, so we're going to tune in specifically to that individual and be able to get their info. So by default, this is turned off in every tenant. You as a tenant administrator have to turn this on, right? That's the first thing. And the second thing is people have to set it up. So if I go into my Teams, not into the admin center, but via PowerShell, you can't do this in the admin center. And I can set this enroll user override to enable. This might be the single worst named commandlet I've ever seen from Microsoft, because when you look at that, you have absolutely no clue what in the world that does. But what that does is it allows the end user to be able to set up voice recognition for themselves in Teams. So if you go today and you look at, if you go into your client and you go to settings, it's very possible you're going to see this screen right here where it says your admin may not have turned on this feature. It may not be available in your region. All right. So by default, that's the default setting. Once you've run these beautiful or this wonderful command, and you'll notice I've set this on the global policy. So you could slow roll this out, right? You could set it up for certain individuals in your organization versus others and kind of go through that process. But once you've turned it on, you then have the ability to create both a voice and a face profile. The face profile we'll talk about in a hot second, but the voice one here, when you click on create voice profile, it's going to give you this prompt, and you simply hit start and you start speaking into your microphone. And what it's going to do is it's going to use your information and go ahead and do its magic so it understands, right? Does voice and face recognition require Teams Room? Absolutely not. And that's a key element. So when I'm back here, right, and I want to turn on, this is just my normal client settings. If I want to turn on voice isolation for noise suppression, I can do that in my normal client. I have to have turned this on, and I've had to have turned on or done this voice process. And Ryan, I didn't miss your note on the Teams Premium Room Premium stuff. I've got a whole slide about that stuff on the tail end too, just as an FYI. So here I can go ahead and I can walk through this, and I'm going to create my voice profile. So then when I turn on noise suppression, right, in my Teams client, and that person is sitting next to me, I don't have that worry of leakage anymore or over suppression, because now the client is trained to know this is Richard's voice, and that's the one we're queuing in on. And that's how, when you take that step back and you look at this slide here, right, and you talk about what's happening in the meeting room. If I'm in a meeting room with 5 people and I want to accurately let Copilot be able to differentiate between the people in the room so it can give me a better suggested notes and a better recap of the meeting, well, then I need the people in that room to have set up that voice, the voice recognition stuff. So it's kind of, they go hand in hand from that perspective. And I understand that probably the number one like freak out moment someone's going to say is, oh no, Microsoft now has like a copy of my voice and all that kind of fun stuff. They really don't, right? Like, it's not like they've got this audio file sitting in the back room somewhere where they had me saying the word, hey there, Teams, right? They're picking up the different type of inflections and different types of items. Every individual has that kind of unique speaking voice. So A, yeah, it's there. B, it's in your tenant only. It's not available anywhere else. And it's just like all the other Copilot safeguards. So there's no one, my voice isn't being used to train some other tenant or vice versa or anything else like that. It is very isolated to that. And not only that, there is an export button there where you can actually click that and you can see what Microsoft really has too. So they've been pretty transparent on how this works. The second piece is the face profile. We'll come back to that one because you'll see some different places where that kind of comes into play. So just drink some water here. All right, so let us continue. So hopefully that makes sense, and that's kind of cool because I find this to be very fascinating, and I can tell you that from our organization, the difference in the accuracy of Copilot before and after when we've set up this voice capture, the voice recognition, is pretty significant. Like, I always thought Copilot did a really good job before, but now I'm like, wow, it is way better. All right. Speaking of Copilot and meetings, let's talk about them a little bit now. So the first thing to know is, right, we have this Copilot experience, and during the meeting, we have the ability to go ahead and interact with it, right? And this goes back, if you think about everything from a building block perspective, right? If I've got my voice recognition turned on, then these kind of actions are more accurate from a Copilot perspective. So during the meeting, I can go ahead and I can interact during that presentation. So I can ask it questions, right? These are some sample prompts. You know, where do we disagree? All those kind of fun things. And it's kind of crazy how good it is at times. I was on a meeting recently where we were pitching different ideas to my boss. And I asked it, what did Hugh think of Jonathan's idea on X? And it came back and it gave me a pretty good synopsis of here are the things he liked and here are the 3 things he was kind of worried about, right? So Copilot, once you give it that information, right, either in a room or at a client perspective or wherever the case is, you kind of start having that power. So it's kind of fascinating. The second piece, and it's funny, everyone I talk to, they always realize that I can use Copilot during a meeting. I can ask it all sorts of funny questions, but what they forget is when the meeting is done and I have this beautiful intelligent recap and I have the meeting notes, I can interact with that meeting after the fact as well. And that's a big item that I think people just simply don't realize, that they kind of have that power to be able to do that interaction both on the front end and back end. But again, the power is in what information is there. So if you've got better voice recognition, it does a better job of doing that. So that's kind of the first section of what are kind of some of the big features that are happening in the Teams room environment that are all happening. And a lot of those, as you can see, are really being driven via AI or kind of some related technology. So how are we making Teams easier to use? So the first thing is a new feature called ultrasonic proximity join. It's a absolutely mouthful of a terminology, but the idea is I can walk into a room, open up my device, and suddenly it knows that where I'm at, and I can go ahead and join that room really fast. And you might be thinking to yourself, boy, this sounds really familiar to a feature that Microsoft had like 2 years ago around Bluetooth, where they did something similar. And you're not wrong, it is similar, but the Bluetooth beaconing had lots of different problems. First, you had to have a hardware that supported it. That was item number 1. And 2, a lot of people don't have the Bluetooth turned on their devices. So you would walk into a room and it wouldn't be able to pick it up. So what they've done is they kind of went back to the drawing board and said, how can we not use the Bluetooth aspect of it? And how can we use this? So now we have this ultrasonic proximity join based on the magic of the sound and what's happening in the room and all that kind of fun stuff. So it's kind of a really neat feature. And as you can see in the video, it'll show you the conference rooms that are nearby, if they're available in a call, whatever the case is, and go ahead and let you join. So that's the first thing, kind of a new feature. The second item to make our lives way easier is UI improvements. So there's 2 big ones. The first one is I can now meet with a meeting ID, and I'm not limited to just Microsoft Teams meetings. So in this case here, you can see that I need to join a meeting ID, and it is going to allow me to type in either my Teams or my Zoom ID, and I can go ahead and join that meeting. So remember, our Teams rooms aren't just limited to Teams anymore. I can use them for Teams, I can use them for Zoom, I can use them for WebEx. So this is just an easier way for us to be able to connect to those meetings. Because I don't know about you, but like the number of help desk tickets, and thankfully continues to go down, but like the wasted time that every meeting starts, thankfully is getting smaller and smaller. It'll never be 0, but at least we're going in the right direction. The second piece there is that QR code, right? I can walk in with my phone, right? That companion device. I could scan the QR code. I could join the meeting directly from that and kick it off that way as well. So there's a lot of different ways from a UI perspective, I can kind of, make my lives a little easier. The second piece then is you can start pairing your Teams rooms. This is definitely a premium feature with using Teams panels. So if you've ever been to any of the Microsoft buildings, you know that when you walk in and you see the outside, they've got the cute little panel and you can see who has that room reserved, and we can do some really neat things. I can check in from that. I can see what the room capacity is. I can see if the room is full. I can reserve from that device to other teams' rooms that might be nearby. I walk up, this one's busy, but one down the hall isn't busy. I could reserve it directly from those. And the last one is the alert piece, which I'm a huge fan of. You walk up to the room, that meeting ahead of you has gone over several minutes. You can kind of do the light tap without having to like open the door and say, please get out, to remind them that their time is kind of expired and that they need to get out of the physical room at that point in time. So it's kind of neat to be able to use those devices. There's a lot of things you can do. Microsoft did announce that in the near future you can sync two of those rooms side by, or two of the panels together. So maybe you got like a really big room that has two doors. You can have one on each door now, and they can sync across from each other so that they're all there. You have that check-in, check-out ability, and then we talked about the occupancy, and that's where I'll stop. If you remember when we talked about the voice recognition, there was that bottom piece about face recognition. That's where you start getting into these kind of features, right? Room capacity, all those kind of things. You start needing those features. Some general improvements, right, on the Teams side. So this is the Teams room on Windows side. So new Teams has been rolled out to all of our Teams rooms. That's fantastic. We talked about the meeting chat. That's shown by default. You can change your language of the device directly in the room now very easily. Before, you kind of had to jump through settings to get there. And as was mentioned by Don in the original thing, in the message center content, we're going to have the ability to stop and start recordings directly from the device. So that's going to be fantastic. On the Android side, there's a lot of new features coming as well, right? So new premium features that were only available on the Windows side are starting to roll out on the Android side. That includes sensitivity labels, watermarks, those kind of things. End-to-end encryption are all there. And then also they've got better layouts and different calendar views. So those are all new features coming to the Android side that some have rolled out, some are in the process of rolling out. And the biggest one that I think, and this is just for all of them, if you've ever used an Android device versus a Windows device for the meeting rooms, you would have noticed that they had very different UIs. So the last release of Android 2.2 and the latest release of the Windows UI, they've actually brought them together. So now when you walk into a room, you have a really hard time differentiating between which ones are Windows and which one are Android based on simply the UI experience. So that's critical for end users, so you don't have to try to train them on two different UIs based on which room, based on which hardware you happen to select in that case. So kind of one of those kind of weird scenarios. Another new feature, I had tons of customers ask about this all the time. I need to have better security for some of my meetings. So maybe you've got a meeting room that is used by the C-level staff, and you want to ensure that when they join a meeting that they're the only ones who are joining it. So we're going to force passcode interaction on the device so that when they attempt to join that meeting, they don't just go into the meeting. They actually have to put in the passcode as well. That's critical, right? If HR had a meeting or something like that, it just prevents inadvertent people from wandering into your meeting space and going and hitting the join button. So it's important. This is a pro license, and we'll talk more licensing at the end, but you'll notice we've talked about 3 different types at this point in time already. There's Copilot, there's Teams Premium, and then there's Teams Room Pro. So there's 3 different areas that they can kind of get you from a licensing perspective. This one is a Teams Room Pro feature, not to be confused with Premium or Copilot. And right now it's only supported on the Windows side. So in this case, if I want to turn this on, I would go to my XML file or the Teams Pro Management Console, and I'd mark this as true, and we'd go ahead and have that meeting passcode. All right, so that's how Microsoft is making it easy to join and easy to use these rooms. I do want to talk about kind of some of the room options at this point in time, just so that everyone's kind of aware of all the moving pieces that are out there in today's world. So Microsoft really boils it down into three kind of categories. You have these modular options where you kind of plug and play and you choose your stuff. So here, right, we've got a different panel, some speaker pods, a rally camera, right, and we kind of have all these different items. You have that middle area, which is that integrated bar experience where all the camera and the mic and everything else is kind of slammed into the same device. And the last one is those touch boards. Maybe you've got like a neat board or something like that that allows you to interact in the room. So Microsoft really, those are kind of the three high level areas where we're always kind of speaking from at this point in time. And the idea is each one of these has a very different feel. So I can tell you from experience that that bar integrated experience works really well in these small focus room kind of environments. If you get past maybe 5 or 6 chairs in a room, I would tell you you've probably exceeded what that integrated bar experience is going to be good for, honestly, because there just becomes a problem with kind of the dynamics of the room and how it all works out. So you'll see, for example, right, in this case, in the focus, in this picture, they've taken all the chairs and they've kind of pointed them at the window or at the TV so that you're all kind of looking at the bar, which makes sense. But the moment you get those bigger rooms, you're going to get back to this more traditional looking room where you've got a table in the center and you've got chairs all around. And I know they've left the chair out intentionally here, but I don't think I've ever been in a room where they actually don't have that chair there. So there's always someone sitting at that chair, and it just makes it a lot easier to expand beyond that integrated bar experience. And now you're looking for kind of that more modular kind of sense where we've maybe have, a camera at the center of the table or speaker pods on the table and, multiple cameras. Maybe there's a rally cam somewhere else, that kind of stuff. And then when you get to the large and the medium-sized ones, right, or the signature rooms, you start getting into just kind of these weird things. I think these are all really cool demos. I've yet to see any organization have a room that actually looks like this large design. I would love to hear if anyone's ever seen one of these in the wild, like outside of Microsoft. What the vast majority of the rooms look like, I think, right, is this small or a medium room where the table is still in the center of the room and people are all gathered around the table, right? It just takes a lot, I think, to convince people to purchase this hardware and this kind of configuration. But who knows, maybe soon it'll be different. So we talked about the different types of devices. So I just want to level set so everyone kind of understands what's out there, right? So when you're in your Teams room space, it all starts to make sense. So we talked a lot about Microsoft Teams rooms for Windows, right? This is what a traditional one might look like. This is a Logitech solution with a pad that sits on the table, some sort of smart compute that's usually mounted under the table or behind the TV, and then some sort of camera, mic kind of scenario. A lot of these start here, and then we can add to them. If I had the compute on the table, I could easily put speaker pods on top of the table then if it's a larger table, and we don't want people kind of screaming across the room. So you kind of just have that kind of functionality. The thing to know here is when you're thinking about your room design, the most flexibility you will always have is in a Teams room for Windows scenario. And you'll see some of that here in a moment, why that's true. But you can pretty much do anything in those rooms. The moment you go beyond that, then you're going to have some limitations that you just have to acknowledge and accept. The second is the Teams room for Android. Now, again, you're going to notice it looks a lot the same. It really is, but this is where you start losing out on some of that ability. Most of the Teams room for Android systems don't have the vast support for external devices connected to it, additional pods, speakers, whatever the case is. So a lot of them are going to look more traditional like this, where they simply have just the touch screen and then the integrated bar, and that's really the only options they have. The next piece is those panels, right? There's lots of people who make the panels. This one's a neat panel. The neat one's interesting because they support wall mount and on the table and side mounts and all that kind of fun stuff. So they got a lot of options here. But that's that kind of panel experience. And the last one we didn't talk a lot about is this Teams display environment where I have some sort of display, right? In this case, we have a neat smart board here, or a neat board, excuse me. So I can go ahead and have that board and I can interact with it and it rolls around and they have options where, it plugs in. But you also have, native devices, right? I could have a Surface Hub, for example. Maybe I've purchased one of those previously. I have that experience. I could do that as well. So you have lots of options there. The last one I want to talk about is this kind of this new area, and it's this bring your own device to the rooms. Microsoft does not talk about this a lot. If you really have to dig into it to find it. So what the bring your own device to your room is, and this is, I think, actually fits, a large number of these kind of really small rooms where you traditionally had, a TV on the wall, and maybe that's all you had, right? So I can walk into this room where I've got this smaller piece of compute, and when I plug into that, I go ahead and I pop the screen out, and I can simply bring my own device into that room. So when I'm in the Teams client, and again, this is one of those things that people don't even realize is there half the time, is when you look under view, there's this more options, and there's this down here, add shared display. And what that does is it allows me to pop my screen out for Teams. So I now have this dedicated shared meeting environment that I can throw up on that shared screen for everyone else. And then at my desk or on my laptop in this case, I have my full client experience and everything else, so I can interact with Windows and do everything like I normally would. So you can do this without the compute in the room. The compute is really handy for, maybe you do have a speaker in there, or maybe you do have some sort of camera shared, then you want that compute. But otherwise, you can literally just bring a laptop in with the screen and pop it out and go ahead and start using that kind of shared bring your own device to that room kind of environment. So again, it doesn't get talked a lot about, but I have a lot of customers that this is, I don't want to say it's their go-to, but they purchase a lot of these smaller computes for these really small rooms because it's a very low investment. We're talking sub $1,000 kind of investments. The next piece I think is important to talk about a little bit. Microsoft announced this a few months ago, this idea of the Microsoft device ecosystem platform. I will not get into the deep dive of this. The general idea is there have been organizations that have been very hesitant about deploying any Android devices in their environment because of the operating system that's there and the security around that OS. So what Microsoft has done is they've layered this MDEP on top of the existing Android open source to secure that environment and that platform further for manufacturers. It does two things for the manufacturer. Now they're all using the same code set, so it's a little easier. Before, they could all just kind of do their own willy-nilly thing. But two, it allows Microsoft to interact more from a hardware security level and allows them to bring more of that information into the Teams Management Console and just gives them more power. So it's a really nice add-on. They announced this recently. There's only a handful of devices that are currently using this. It does require Android 13, so a lot of legacy devices aren't upgradable to this. So this is kind of one of those new in the future kind of things, but it's important to realize and call that out. I do have to throw this random, most people are like, why are we talking about VDI all of a sudden? There's a lot of clients out there that are using VDI in meetings and in meeting spaces, right? So I do want to just call this out that Microsoft's made some huge investments from that perspective as well. I won't get into the details. I just want to add this slide primarily so you guys can, hit the link. And if you're a VDI shop, this is incredibly important to know that the meeting experience is very different going forward. So this question I get asked all the time, should I choose Windows or Android for my Teams meeting room? I always tell people you should really pick Windows. That's where you have the most options for you. But there are specific features that simply do not exist on the Android and vice versa. So what I did is I went to, and this is the down at the bottom, I've got the full link here, but it has all the features that are supported either on Windows or Android. So on the left-hand side, those are the two features that on the Windows side are not supported that Android does. So it's just some meeting console items. It's just how they handle the touch screen. That's literally the only difference. What you'll notice on the other side, though, is there's some pretty big items missing from for the Teams rooms for Android. The first one I call out is that cloud IntelliFrame and the multi-stream IntelliFrame we talked about before. I mentioned that previously, that's all Windows features today. Yes, some of that is coming to Android in the future, but if you want to have that better experience with IntelliFrame, Windows is going to give you that best one. The second one, and this is kind of the biggie to me, is that health monitoring of devices. So Android has a much more limited ability to be able to monitor different devices that are plugged into your Teams room systems. And that's important because if you want to have a holistic approach from a service perspective, I want to be able to see the full picture of everything. So that's that. The last item in terms of types of rooms, and I was on the fence of adding this or not, but I don't know. Someone in chat can tell me if they've ever used it, but you should know that Microsoft Teams rooms now support Microsoft Mesh. So if you really wanted to, you could have a mesh environment inside of your Teams room environment. I've never seen anyone use it from that perspective, but know that it is absolutely supported at this time. So, all right. Last piece, deployment and management of your Teams room. So what you're seeing here is an actual picture of a meeting space that we walked into, and this is how they literally had their room set up. They had this computer with a bunch of crazy cables, and it was an absolute mess underneath the tables. So that's what most management looks like. So what I do want to do here real quick is I'm going to pop out of here and I'm going to bring this over. So Microsoft gives us a really great, I'm going to hit refresh here just to make sure my token hasn't expanded. It did, see. All right, here we go. So when I'm in my Teams rooms and my windows, you'll notice that everything is going to go ahead and load into that into the Teams admin center for me so I can start managing it. So behind me right now, I have my Logitech Smart Dock. That's what I use as my personal Teams room device when I'm doing demos and other kind of fun things. And from the Teams admin panel, you can see I can get some really good information. Here you'll notice this one is in critical. And if I scroll down, we'll see the reason for that is I walked over there and I physically unplugged the monitor from it so that there's no display connected to it anymore. So now I get to see that information roll up into the Teams admin center. It's important to note that what you're seeing down here is part of the Teams Room Pro licensing. So if you have basic, you're not going to see that. So it's yet another reason kind of to want to upgrade. So here from a management perspective, I can see all those devices. It's great. What Microsoft has done for us, though, and I think is much more powerful, I'm going to hit refresh again here because I'm sure this one's logged out by now. Oh, I got lucky. And this is the Teams Room Pro management. And we're going to talk about licensing, and you'll see the differences here in a second. But when your devices are registered as a Teams Pro device, you have a lot more features and functionality than you do at the basic level. And I will tell you that I strongly recommend every organization to purchase the Pro license. Yes, it's $40 a month. Yes, it's a pain, but you get so much out of it that I think it's kind of silly not to. The two biggies that I always point to, right, is first, you get that nice view of the entire organization, and I can dig into individual ones and I can get specific items that are unhealthy. Right here, there's that display item. Here I've got security things. I still have the default credentials, for example, right? All of this information is accessible to me because I have that pro license. That's critical to me. The other piece is I can easily push out centralized settings from the Pro Management Console that do not exist in the Teams Admin Center. So that's one of the biggest reasons too. So maybe I did have a Surface Hub device and I wanted to enable coordinated meetings. If you had BASIC, the only way you can do that is to go fiddle with the XML file on that device, pray that you didn't goof it up when you re-uploaded it, and reboot the device and hope you didn't brick the thing. Here, if it's in Pro, I can literally just flip it on and start choosing what the trusted devices are and all the things that would be in that XML file. And those settings will get pushed down to the device. So being able to manage the device at a much more granular level, I think is really critical and one of the reasons to do that. The second one, and this is, I think, the biggie to me, is around this idea of updates. So by default, when you have a room that's in BASIC, it will simply update once the updates come available. That's a lot of saying the word update a lot. But what that means is all of your devices are all going to pretty much update at about the same time, which is if there's a problem, right, that something bad could happen, knock on wood, Logitech, I think it was 6 months ago, inadvertently bricked all their MTRs via an update. Oops. Then they're all going to take that and that's going to be a problem. So here I can create specific rings. So I could say, hey, I want all my devices that are for my staging or my testing environment, we're going to roll those out within the 7 days of that update becoming available. Now I have some information. Now I know the success of it. And I can go ahead and work my way up so that those C-level folks that I don't really want to annoy too terribly, right? They're the last individuals to get that update. They're less likely, well, they're more likely to complain. They're less likely to complain if you do this because you're not going to interfere. You might not accidentally break their devices. So this idea of rings, I think, is really, really critical and really important. There's all sorts of other features inside of the Pro Management. We can set this up with ServiceNow. So if someone were to, let's say, go physically unplug that HDMI cable from a room, it'll actually send an alert to ServiceNow and open a ticket immediately. And now you're proactively being told about problems in the rooms versus them always being reactive moments, which is what happens all too often. So that's kind of just a view into the Teams Pro perspective. So I always want to talk about this is where the kind of those licensing kind of conversations come in, right? So Microsoft allows you to have basic licenses. I don't know why that off shifted, but basic is here. So you have 25 licenses of basic. That's the most. If you have more than 25 rooms, sorry, you can't get more. You're upgrading to Pro somewhere. So just go ahead and do it. The big ones here, right? We talked about that Pro Management room. If I want to use that room for outbound dialing at all, then I have to have a Pro license because that's where the phone standard comes. But the last three here are really important. If I want to do conditional access, I want to add extra security, right? Defender, all those kind of fun things. I need my Pro license to be able to do all of that. Some of the other Pro exclusive features that I always like to call out, right? That content capture camera that we talked about before, that's Pro. Some of the front row together modes, that dual screen support of a MTR, that requires a Pro license along with the multi-camera support and people counting and AI noise suppression. So some of those items, right, will work fine in the Teams client by themselves, but when you want to bring them to that Teams room environment, you really do need that Pro licensing. And the last piece I want to just call out here is new as of a couple of months ago. So one of the biggest reasons people loved to deploy Windows, Microsoft Teams rooms for Android, was because it was pretty much a zero-touch experience in order to get them onto the network and registered and all that kind of fun stuff. For Windows, it was kind of a pain in the butt. Microsoft's introduced this idea of autopilot and auto login. It's a near zero touch experience. It's not zero touch. Someone still needs to go to it and start the first steps of the out-of-box experience for the Windows setup. But once you get past the keyboard setup and you hit the network, it's going to know the device is part of autopilot. It's going to know all that information, and it's going to start automatically registering, get them into Pro, get all the right information on them from that perspective. So it definitely simplifies the deployment. If you don't have Pro and you're trying to use the Windows stuff, your only option then is to have a really nice image and reimage stuff like it's 2005 still. So I'm a huge fan of this. It works really well. And I put the link at the bottom so you can get all the details. So I have 3 minutes to spare. Nailed that one. So again, that I try to hit kind of there's a lot of topics happening inside of that. I get that. The key piece to know is that there's a continual evolution that's happening at the team's room environment. And I'm hopeful that a lot of you are starting to see where Microsoft is continuing to take this hybrid meeting concept and continue to expand it and making it available to everyone to join. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them in the chat, come off mute, or you can always catch me online, either LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever. And with that all said, I will hand it back to Michelle or Don or whomever